Can we just take a second to appreciate now that I'm finally able to post a full review within days of a movie's release? This never happens, since normally I have to wait months until a film leaves theaters and is available on home media. So I'd like to enjoy the moment. Of course, it is only due to extenuating circumstances that it's even possible today for us to review and discuss Mulan, the latest in a multitude of Disney live-action remakes for their classic animated films. Mulan was originally scheduled for release back in March of this year, but had to be pushed back several times due to the ongoing pandemic. Disney was very adamant for a long time about releasing the film as soon as possible, but wanting to do so in theaters, likely to maximize profits through those lucrative ticket sales. But now, over half a year later from their original release date, they finally conceded to make it available for streaming on their Disney Plus platform. Though, that already requires a subscription fee and then an additional $30 to rent the damn thing. For a family of 4 or more without any memberships to specific theaters, I'm sure it was a great deal compared to normal ticket costs. But for individuals such as myself, well, break out the peg legs and eye patches because a lot of people are suddenly becoming pirates. If you would like to skip the plot overview and go straight to my spoiler-free thoughts, you can skip to this timestamp in the video. So with that said, let's get down to business and get right into it. The movie begins with narration from Mulan's father, who tells us there have been many tales of the great warrior Mulan. Wow, thanks for the spoiler in the first minute, my guy. But this is his tale. We see the aforementioned future warrior extraordinaire as a child who is already quite skilled at fighting with a sword. And we are told she is a great wielder of Qi, the boundless energy of life itself, which is meant to be an all-boys only club, so as a daughter, she would bring dishonor upon her family if others were to find out. So of course, the logical conclusion is to keep that particular factoid a complete secret from little Mulan. This poor planning on Dad's part comes to a head one day as Mulan and her father are attempting to herd chickens into a pen and one runs off, prompting Mulan to chase it and causing havoc all throughout the village. Her mother commands she control herself, but that doesn't stop Mulan from acrobating herself up onto the roof in pursuit of this chicken. She starts to slip and fall, but using her Qi reflexes, or maybe we're having a Disney crossover and she's learned to channel the Force or something, in order to land safely. And the villagers seem to know something is on the up and up. Mulan overhears her parents talking about the incident, her mother being especially upset, saying daughters bring honor through marriage, not flitting about rooftops chasing chickens, and she worries Mulan will be called a witch. While cleaning up the mess around the shrine, Dad tells Mulan her Qi is strong and such a thing is meant for a warrior, not daughters. And soon she will grow up and have to marry. Therefore, she must suppress her power to bring honor to the family. Everyone's so hyper-fixated on honor. Do they ever talk about anything else? Meanwhile, we interrupt Mulan to bring you Aladdin, I guess, as this man is traveling through a desert with some camels. He sees a woman and seems to think he's hallucinating until she merges into his body and goes to one of the Imperial Army's garrisons. A group of warriors called the Rorans approach on horseback, prompting the Imperial soldiers to fire arrows at them, but the leader establishes how badass he is by catching one and firing it right back. The Rorans run up the wall all ninja-like and fight the guards and the woman whose name I'm not sure if we ever learn it, so I'm just gonna call her Bird Lady. I mean, hey, if the filmmakers can't be bothered to properly introduce characters and give them sufficient character development, then I can't be bothered to learn their names. And that's just how it goes. Anyway, all that blah-blah-blah just to say Bird Lady possesses another guy. At the Imperial City, the Chancellor reports to the Emperor that 6 garrisons have fallen in a coordinated attack, disrupting trade and slaughtering all citizens minus one being the dude possessed by Bird Lady. The leader of the Rorans is named as Bori Khan, whose father was killed by the Emperor some time ago, so now he's coming as an act of revenge. Still posing as a soldier, Bird Lady tells of a woman who has incredible Qi powers even though it is forbidden, using dark magic and training shadow warriors to fight alongside Bori Khan. And obviously she's referring to herself, and there's no reason for her to be divulging this information except for the benefit of getting some exposition to the audience. Also, side note, why not just possess the Emperor here and now? She's standing right in front of him, she can possess him, or stab him, or whatever the heck she wants, and poof into a bird and fly away. Job done, easy peasy, let's call it a day. Maybe Borikhan's got some weird macho thing where he has to be the one to do the killing, which is silly, but they've got a perfect opportunity to end this thing immediately, and they don't take it. Anyway, a decree is issued by the Emperor for one man from every family to come fight in the war. Bird Lady leaves and turns into a bird to fly back to Borikhan to tell him of the Emperor's plan to fight back. She gets a little touchy when he calls her a witch, but is apparently helping him because she wants a place where her powers won't be vilified. So, if you don't want to be seen as a villain, maybe don't possess and murder people? That seems reasonable. Is that just me? By now, Mulan has grown into a free-spirited young lady, and it is time for her to meet the matchmaker to determine if she will be matched to a potential husband, as it is what is best for her family. Mulan is clearly unhappy about it, but wants to bring honor to her family, so she gets prepped and made up to meet the matchmaker with her mother and sister. It goes well at first until a spider comes down from the ceiling, which her sister is extremely afraid of, and it starts crawling across the table. So Mulan, instead of saying, oh hey, there's a spider, and squish it, or let someone else squish it if she's trying to be all proper, tries to cover it with the teapot, and once she's told to move it, her sister screams and the spider leaps at the matchmaker, toppling the table and sending all the teacups flying, so Mulan has to use her special chi powers to catch everything, but she slips and drops them all so they break. This feels like very much not her fault. If anything, it's her sister that set all this fuckery in motion, but the matchmaker blames Mulan and declares dishonor on the Hua family for having failed to raise a good daughter. At that moment, Imperial soldiers arrive to bring news of the invaders and the edict from the Emperor. Being the only man in Mulan's family, her father is expected to fight despite already having served in a previous war and being old and injured, even falling when he goes to take the decree from the soldier. The family is obviously upset that he has to go since he will surely die in battle, and he says it's his duty to bring honor to the family on the battlefield, implying that Mulan has failed in her duty and that she needs to learn her place. Mulan watches her father practice with his sword, but he is very weak, though he says their family crest of the Phoenix will follow him into battle since he has been loyal, brave, and true. Fuck, this is gonna be another thing that's repeated a million times, isn't it? Yeah, it definitely is. He tells Mulan to be courageous for the rest of her family since he will not return from war this time. After he goes to bed, Mulan takes the sword and swings it around a bit, then in the next shot we see her donning her father's armor and leave? What, that's it? No epic montage of cutting her hair to disguise herself as a man or preparing to leave? Not even any build-up as she comes to terms with this immensely difficult decision to take her father's place in the war and risk her own life? Literally, it's just a few seconds between holding the sword, showing she's got the armor on, then a sudden jump to the next morning. Disney, you're cutting out the best parts! What are you doing? The next morning, her family figures out Mulan took the sword and armor, but even though she could die in battle, they can't go to stop her because if they expose her, she will be executed by the army. The father then goes to pray to their ancestors and ask the Phoenix to watch over Mulan because she's made such a grave mistake. She's naive about the world and it's his fault since he should have told her sooner that she needs to learn her place? Well, this guy's certainly not winning any Father of the Year awards anytime soon. Mulan travels toward the camp but runs out of food on the journey and worries that she is lost. Then later wakes to see a phoenix flying around and it leads her to camp. What? I thought this whole phoenix thing was like a metaphor or symbolism. Are we just gonna gloss over this mythological creature that's apparently entirely real just suddenly appearing out of nowhere? Mulan isn't even that amazed or concerned. She just says, "Oh, it's the phoenix." like it's an average, everyday occurrence. Between this and the magical powers for our titular character, I'm really starting to question if the filmmakers really followed through on their choice to base this film more in reality. So Mulan arrives at camp and hides among the other men. One of the men, named Cricket, just randomly starts chatting to another soldier about his life story, saying he was born under an auspicious moon, so his mother says he's a good luck charm. I guess it's meant to be a stand-in for the actual insect from the animated film. All the while, the guys behind him try to stick grass in his ear. These are normal human interactions that definitely exist in real life. It causes a bit of a kerfuffle, and Mulan gets knocked down, and when one of the men named Huang Hui makes a snarky remark while trying to help her up, she overcompensates with her faux masculine attitude by immediately drawing her sword and threatening him. For fuck's sake, the worst thing animated Mulan did was spit awkwardly. Why is this suddenly going to such an extreme? This whole movie is so weird. Their commanding officer, Commander Tung, comes to break up the confrontation and asks Mulan for her name, which she gives as Hua Jun. Mulan has a hard time adjusting to being around a bunch of men and volunteers as a night guard to avoid showering around the other soldiers. During training, where the sergeant declares they will make men out of every single one of the soldiers, a nice callback to the animated film, he outlines the penalties for certain offenses like stealing, deserting the camp, consorting with women, and other things that will result in a death sentence. Oh, fun! Many of the soldiers, including Mulan, struggle with the grueling and physically extensive training at first, but some slowly begin to improve. During a training course where they have to carry large buckets of water up a mountain, one of the soldiers cheats by dumping out some of the water when he assumes no one is looking, but he is caught and expelled from the camp with the highest disgrace to himself, his family, his country, and yeah. At mealtime, the men start discussing their ideal woman, wanting someone pretty, who can cook and whatnot, similar to the song A Girl Worth Fighting For from the animated version. They ask Mulan what her ideal woman is, and she says she would want someone courageous and smart with a good sense of humor, and they all laugh at her. Hong Hui goes to her later and tells her not to worry about the other dum-dums and asks if she has been matched. She says she was, and it didn't work out, but the two start to sort of bond. Mulan starts to fall behind with training when she is sparring with Hong Hui, and decides she must unleash her magical chi powers so she doesn't look bad to her boo, and suddenly starts kicking all the ass. The others are impressed, of course, but she storms off and scolds herself for not hiding her chi as she's been told. After many comments about her smell due to not having showered the entire time, she goes to bathe in a nearby lake by herself, but Hong Hui arrives and she turns away to hide her, chestises. He's still marveling over her impressive skill and attempts to make amends for their volatile introduction on the first day, which she rebuffs, but he still says they are equal in fighting against the same enemy and must protect their fellow soldiers. Meanwhile, the leader of the other Roran tribes meet with Borikhan to discuss strategy before moving on the Imperial City, but the others dislike the idea of having to work with a witch and say she can't be trusted. Borikhan insists the witch serves him and that she is no threat to them, and instructs her to destroy the next garrison. Back at camp, Mulan is instructed to report to Commander Tung, who states that he knows her father and what a great warrior he was, and he advises her to cultivate her chi gift and not allow her father's legacy to hold her back. So Mulan chooses to stop hiding her powers and suddenly excels at training, outshining all the others. So this is how she succeeds? Not because she worked hard or came up with a creative solution no one else thought of, but because she's freaking magical and is no longer suppressing her powers that she already had full control over as a child? Yikes. Way to shit all over the animated version. The Rorans continue their assault across the country despite these brutal fights somehow never spilling any blood because God forbid the children see a little blood in this war movie. So the troops are being sent out to battle and must first take the oath of the warrior to be loyal, brave, and true. God, I'm already getting sick of this. But of course, Mulan isn't being true and wants to confess to Commander Tung because she feels guilty. But just as she's about to, he suddenly invites her back to his village to meet his daughter and the village matchmaker after the war, which is supposed to be a big honor or something. Okay. The battalion travels to a garrison and receives news that Bori Khan's men are only a half day's ride away, and they must prepare to leave for battle immediately despite being greatly outnumbered. The other men get anxious, believing they won't make it out of the fight alive, but Mulan gives them a pep talk and everyone is suddenly fine with embarking on what should essentially be a suicide mission. Jumping right to the battlefield, there's a brief standoff before Bori Khan gives the order to attack. The Imperial soldiers send arrows raining down on the Rorans, and Bori Khan and many of his men turn around to flee. So a small group of soldiers, including Mulan, chase after them and fall into the very obvious trap, and the Rorans spin around and suddenly start firing at them. Most of the soldiers in this group are killed, and the few left except Mulan retreat, but she continues pursuing the Rorans alone. She loses sight of them, but is attacked by the bird lady, who immediately recognizes Mulan isn't who she says she is, and tells her that she will die pretending to be someone she is not because deceit poisons her chi? Really? Well, this is new. She was doing fine with her false persona up until now, but I suppose we have to make up new rules as we go just so there's some sort of conflict and the movie can exist. We get more narration stating that Hua Jun did die after being attacked by the bird lady because a lie can only live for so long, and Hua Mulan lived. I think this was supposed to sound very wise and profound, but my first reaction was to laugh because it's just so cringy. We see the Phoenix yet again just randomly hanging out and not actually doing anything, so Mulan suddenly feels inspired to be her true self or something. So she lets down her hair and throws off her father's armor. I don't know how smart of a decision that is in the middle of a battle. I mean, even if it wasn't super useful and potentially life-saving in a fight, which it is, just discarding something that is very precious and sentimental to your family seems like kind of a dick move. So she goes back to where the rest of the soldiers are fighting the Rorans, and now she's suddenly like a god, basically, doing all these fancy flippy moves and tricks and single-handedly takes down all these men without even breaking a sweat. Until the Rorans run away, thinking she's a witch. Bird Lady is flying overhead and turns herself into a swarm of smaller birds that descend on the Imperial soldiers, while the Rorans fire a massive catapult from a distance. Mulan whistles for her horse and suddenly teleports behind a mountain. Like, literally, whoever edited this is awful at their job because we see in one shot she mounts her horse, and then about 2 seconds later we see she has somehow managed to make her way around the entire Roran army and position herself behind them at the base of a mountain. I mean, I know she's all magical and shit, but I don't think she has teleporting powers. At least, not yet. So she starts firing arrows at the Rorans, and she's set up a bunch of helmets to make it appear as if there are more soldiers on the ridge than just her. So they turn the catapult around and fire toward the mountain, which triggers an avalanche that buries the Rorans in snow and almost gets some of her fellow soldiers killed when Cricket gets stuck under a wagon and Huang Hui has to save him. But he gets swept up in the snow himself, so Mulan has to save him. Once the soldiers regroup, Mulan reveals herself to the rest of them as a woman because I guess during the fight none of them noticed an armorless, long-haired woman doing kickflips and shit in the air. The soldiers are stunned to learn the truth, and Commander Tung says she has brought disgrace upon her family. But although for some reason she literally demands to be executed, like, bitch, what the fuck are you doing? She is expelled from the army instead and told that if they see her again, then they will execute her. After she goes off to cry, Bird Lady appears to tell her she understands and know what it feels like to have people turn on her and be exiled. Basically saying they're the same and they should merge paths and be stronger together. Mulan refuses and says Bird Lady follows a coward because Bori Khan ran from battle. But Bird Lady says he didn't actually run and instead went to take the Imperial city while the soldiers were distracted. Bird Lady asks one more time for Mulan to take her place beside her, but Mulan says she knows her place is to protect the Emperor. So she rides off with the Phoenix following her. Does this damn bird ever do anything besides be a fancy set piece? She arrives back at the garrison to warn Commander Tung that the Emperor is in danger. And at first he doesn't believe her because she lied to all of them and is about to execute her as he said he would. But Hong Hui comes to her defense saying she is braver than all of them and the best warrior. So that persuades the rest to all declare they believe her, and eventually Commander Tung follows suit and they set off for the Imperial City with Mulan leading them for some reason. Bird Lady goes back to the Imperial City and possesses the Chancellor and tells the Emperor that Borikhan is right outside and wants to duel, which he accepts and immediately leaves for. As the Chancellor, Bird Lady also orders all guards to gather in the square so there is no one left for defense, allowing Borikhan's men to sneak into the Imperial City. Mulan and her fellow soldiers are ambushed and the Emperor is captured by Borikhan. She goes ahead to find the Emperor while the rest stay back to hold off the Rorans. When she arrives at the throne room, Bird Lady is on the throne, who is astonished that a woman is leading a man's army and that Mulan has been accepted while she was not. She flees to Borikhan and Mulan chases her across the rooftops of the palace, and Bird Lady tells Borikhan that they are facing resistance by a woman from a small village. But he figures out that Bird Lady actually led Mulan to him. He fires an arrow at Mulan, but Bird Lady flies in front of it and gets hit to save her. But we've seen Mulan dodge a few dozen arrows already in battle with her amazing superpowers. Was this self-sacrifice thing really necessary? So just before Bird Lady dies, she tells Mulan to take her place, so she goes to face Borikhan. The two fight until Mulan suddenly loses her sword in a pool of molten metal, because that's a thing people have just lying around. But the Emperor tells her to rise up like the Phoenix! And as if on cue, the Phoenix suddenly appears to be a motivational decoration once more. So she continues fighting, and Borikhan seemingly falls to his death, and Mulan goes to untie the Emperor. But Borikhan uses the last of his strength to fire an arrow at the Emperor, who catches it and tosses it into the air for Mulan to do a fancy kick and drive it into Borikhan's torso. God, this movie is so freaking strange. The other soldiers defeat the last of the Rorans, the city celebrates their victory, and the Emperor honors Mulan and offers her a job as an officer in his personal guard. While she is grateful, she says she cannot accept and only wishes to return home to her family, to fulfill her oath of being loyal, brave, and true. God, I'm so tired of hearing this stupid tagline. As she's leaving, she is stopped by Hong Hui to tell her goodbye, and they sort of almost shake hands before she takes off. How romantic. Mulan arrives back at her village, and apparently news travels fast because everyone is proud and happy towards her before she even gets there. Immediately, she apologizes to her father for losing the sword. No mention of the armor that she also didn't bring back, but whatever. And her father apologizes for allowing his pride to drive her away. Commander Tung arrives with the sergeant and some other soldiers to present a gift of a replacement sword to Mulan and declare her honor, much to the annoyance of the matchmaker. Although I'm more annoyed they didn't bother to give this to her while she was still at the Imperial City. Like, they arrived at the village literally minutes after she did, after riding for probably a few days when they could have saved a whole lot of time and effort by just giving her the damn thing before she left. Logic is not a concept that exists in this movie. They extend the Emperor's job offer again, and Mulan sees the Phoenix in the reflection of the sword, and we hear more narration from her father that she became a legend, and that's it. That's the end of the movie. We don't know what her decision was, if she ever got with Hong Hui, nothing, nada, zip, nil. No satisfying closure for you. The bare bones of this story is mostly the same compared to the animated version. A young woman takes the place of her elderly father in a war that has broken out in China, requiring one man from every family to enlist. So she disguises herself and goes off to battle, and so on and so on. So if you've seen the original Mulan, then you already know how this one is going to turn out as well. Mulan was always one of my favorites of the Disney classics as a clumsy, awkward little girl myself. This was a Disney character I could really look up to and admire because despite her flaws, she was still able to get past that to achieve things no one else could. good. The movie itself also included some rather dark elements, and the story had a lot of depth, so I was bound to have strong feelings towards this remake one way or the other. It was a bit of a roller coaster for me as the film went through production and more news was coming out about it. On one hand, it deviates quite a lot from the original version. It doesn't follow the traditional musical format that many Disney films do, and certain beloved characters have been completely removed. But then on the other hand, the film is based more on the original folklore, the Ballad of Mulan, rather than the Disney animated version, which I was definitely not upset about if they were going to differentiate from the original version in this way, and it looks like it could potentially be good. For those who may be new here, I do tend to view films with a more critical eye than the average bear, especially with the remakes of classic childhood films like this. So for me to be even slightly hopeful after some of the atrocities from Disney over the past few years, that was an impressive feat to pull off. But unfortunately, in my opinion, Mulan didn't even come close to living up to expectations, and quite honestly, is one of the worst live-action remakes we've had so far. There isn't one aspect of this film I enjoyed without having to include a but and follow up with something negative. For example, the action is well choreographed and looks very nice, but the majority of the action scenes are overly edited to a very obnoxious extent. Some have too many cuts that make it difficult to follow what's happening. Other times there's too much slow motion that continuously takes me out of that epic moment. And the editing in general is just all over the place to a point where it's a consistent problem throughout the entire film. I also like many of the actors in this film and think they did a good job. Jet Li was great as the Emperor, along with the actors playing the other soldiers, but many others, including the lead actress, were very bland, and it was like their first time even reading through the script, just like this, with no emotion or inflection in their voice whatsoever at any point throughout the entire movie. Also, the brief moments of instrumental versions of songs from the animated films being worked into the score is a very nice touch, but it's so little and not nearly as much as I had hoped. Like, that amazing and powerful version of Reflection isn't in the movie at all. So you see what I mean? I can't even compliment this film in any way without having to backtrack. So let's keep it simple and start with some of the changes that bothered me the least. The Mulan remake is rated PG-13, unlike most Disney films, and this allows for more violence than the average Disney movie, since it is essentially a war movie, so that comes with the territory. Although there is so little comedic relief and lighter moments, it's just near constant serious scenes that are so damn stiff and dark. Which again, I understand it's a war movie, and I hate to constantly compare it to the animated version, but at this point, this thing is just impossible to be its own entity. But I feel like in the animated version, they had a far superior balance. The majority of the first half was a lot of silliness and fun, but then it reaches a very jarring point towards the middle when the troops come upon the ruined village mid-song. Everyone suddenly stops singing, and there's no more musical numbers from that point on, because that's when the reality of this war almost quite literally hits them and us as the audience right in the face. And the scenes from then on are far more serious and somber than they had been previously. Whereas in the remake, I never laughed or smiled at any specific points, at least when I was supposed to. There were quite a few cringy scenes and dialogue choices that elicited a few giggles out of me. As far as removed characters, I could understand excluding talking dragons with a Lucky Cricket sidekick, since the filmmakers said they wanted the story to be more realistic. Though they do have a character that literally turns into a bird, but sure, realism. But it's their reasoning for removing Li Shang from the film that has me the most confused. They essentially split his role between two separate characters, one being Mulan's commanding officer and the other taking the part of the love interest. Because according to the producer, this decision was influenced by the Me Too movement, since having a commanding officer who was also a love interest was very uncomfortable and they didn't think it was appropriate. Which to an extent I can understand, you tried, so points for effort. But the whole problem is Shang's entire character arc in the animated film was about realizing Mulan isn't inferior just because she's a woman. He learns and grows into more of an open-minded person because of her. So to me, this seems like one of the biggest aspects that should have been left alone, since there are certainly a lot of people who could learn from something like this. Because with how it's written, and also because of the character being split it up, this newer version doesn't pull it off nearly as well. This part might be treading a bit into spoiler territory, but one of the biggest changes I disliked story-wise was the heavy leaning on the idea of Mulan being some sort of chosen one. Like, she can succeed and do amazing things, but not because she put forward a great deal of effort or became a better person, but because it's written in the stars or some shit. The chosen one trope tends to bother me a bit normally as it is. Yes, I am looking very specifically at you, Star Wars sequel trilogy. But then taking a character who is an average person and worked and trained her butt off through ridicule and mockery and those around her believing she would fail, who still persevered and pushed herself to do her best and show an incredible amount of bravery in the face of adversity and do what's right to save those she cares about. Now, whatever fantastical thing she does isn't because of her or her training or her bravery or creative solutions, but it's because of her status as the chosen one, which I believe does a massive disservice to the character. There's nothing happening that's really special, no lessons learned. Character growth and development is essentially non-existent. Having the main character be established as magical from the very beginning takes away the investment and attachment we feel as an audience, because she's got everything handed to her on a silver platter without any sort of struggle to rise to the top. She doesn't have to try. She could have just skated through the entirety of the movie's events and probably still would have ended the same way. This is what really seals the deal on my negative opinions for this film as a whole. Like many live-action remakes of Disney films, this seems very much like a watered-down version of the far superior animated movie. There were times where I genuinely had to pause the movie because I was just so bored and annoyed that I really needed a break. Even if I wasn't comparing it directly to the animated version, by itself, it's still not well made with a story that oftentimes doesn't make a lot of sense and has some very haphazard editing. And it outright spits on its source material, whether that be the animated film or the original folklore. So because of this, I'm giving Mulan my personal score of 3 out of 10. It's been reported that there is a sequel in the works, and I have no idea what they will do for the story because the animated Mulan does have a sequel, but it revolves around the relationship between Mulan and Shang. But obviously Shang isn't in the film, so it could very likely be something original with no source material. And this could be better in some ways or worse in others, so we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. Let me know what you guys think, and if you have any suggestions for movies I should discuss and review in the future. Thank you everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you have not already, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Bye!